Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us here in San Antonio. Should be a great day. We're going to start out with a presentation on the artistic legacy of Buck Schiwetz by Linda and Bill Reaves, who are the general editors of the Texas Art Series from the Texas A&M University Press. Linda and Bill are retired educators whose hobby of collecting Texas art prompted them to learn more about the works in their collection and the artists who created them. Common story, I think, in this room. They were instrumental in the founding of Cassetta and saving it, and had authored or co-authored several books on Texas art. The couple previously owned an art gallery specializing in historic and contemporary Texas art, which is now the Sarah Foltz Gallery. The Reaves helped establish the Texas Art Project at Texas A&M and are now hosting a series of exhibitions at A&M's Start Galleries. They're in the process of gifting a major portion of their personal collection to Texas A&M University and the University of Houston at Victoria. Bill and Linda, will you join us? There we go.
Thank you, appreciate that. All right, can you hear me? Yes. Absolutely remarkable, that's great. Well, welcome everybody. We are delighted to have everyone here and to be again at Cassetta. And before we begin our talk today on one of our favorite artists, Buck Schiwetz, Lynn and I wanted to take just a moment and extend our thanks to the Cassetta board and this board and all boards past and present to thank you once again for creating this opportunity for all of us to be able to come together, all of us who really do love and appreciate Texas art. It's really a great opportunity. We thank you all very much, and certainly want to thank Howard, Allura, and all the staff that are part of SAMFA and part of Cassetta. So this is terrific. Lynn and I today, in the time allotted, want to kind of take you through a quick survey of, as I noted previously, one of our favorite artists, Buck Schiwetz. What we're going to do is run quickly through this and kind of look at visually some works over the course of his career, give you a little bit of backdrop, and then at the end we're going to introduce you to what we think is, in addition to good scholarship, I think that's already occurred on Schiwetz, a great new research tool that we're prototyping and I think will be useful in looking at art in the future, not only for Schiwetz, but other artists as well. So we want to give you a teaser on that. Tiana Uchas, an associate professor, is with us. So, Linda.
Edward M. Buck Schiwetz was in his mid-80s when he died almost 40 years ago. Today, Bill and I are going to talk about his record as a fine artist, the evolution of his style over time, and his significance among 20th century artists. Our presentation is based on the book we wrote, The Artistic Legacy of Buck Schiwetz, published by Texas A&M University Press, and on sale at this symposium across the hall at the press booth. We are indebted to the contributors to this book. Kelly Montana of the Manil Drawing Institute wrote a chapter on Buck Schiwetz drawings. Sarah Beth Wilson, now also at the Manil and past chair of Cassetta's board, wrote a chapter on his oils and mixed media. And in his chapter, David Woodcock, emeritus professor at Texas A&M University, describes briefly, but interestingly, architectural studies at A&M in the 20s when Schiwetz was attending. And David also documents his contributions to preserving indigenous Texas architecture. We are also indebted to many private collectors and museums for the images in the book, some of which you will see today.
Buck Schiwetz, as many of you know, lived a really very multifaceted career. He worked over the span of about 6 decades. He was very successful in all of the dimensions in which he pursued. First, as a commercial artist, which is what he did in order to put bread on the table and to support a family. He began, and as you'll see in a moment, in Dallas, Texas in 1922, working there as an architectural delineator, an art form in the 20s that was extremely important in the field of architecture, where the renderings that would be developed by a delineator like Schiwetz would be used to show a homeowner, an investor in a major building, what that building would look like in context, and what it would look like within the context particularly of the landscape around it. It was extremely valuable in terms of the work of architecture and highly valued in terms of an art form during those days. He moved from there into advertising. When he moved back to Houston, he became a partner and an art director in an architectural firm that eventually grew to the largest the largest advertising firm in the American Southwest, and was incorporated and bought out by McCann Erickson, a New York firm that is still in existence today. And so he was highly successful and deeply engaged in his work, working full-time at that in the advertising. And then finally, he moved into illustration, using his work to illustrate books, particularly related to Texas history and Texas preservation. Later in his career, beginning in the 50s, he worked successfully as an architectural preservationist, not so much doing the actual restoration of buildings, but using his artwork to document iconic Texas buildings from the 19th century that were rapidly vanishing, and using his expertise in terms of helping to determine what types of preservation work really did need to occur. He was also at the same time a fine artist, and that is what we are going to concentrate on in this talk today, and what the book primarily looks at.
Throughout his life, and in many ways, despite the demands of his work in advertising and illustration, Buck Schiwetz maintained a successful career as a fine artist, whose accomplishments place him squarely among the foremost artists working in the middle years of the 20th century. In this presentation, we will showcase his strong exhibition record and visually examine the evolution of his work and style.
One of the things that Linda and I have discovered in trying to consider the development of artists and their work over time is to actually map it. To us, it's a good graphic organizer to really kind of track an artist's career literally. And so we'll try to do some of this in our presentation today, but you'll see a more sophisticated version of this that's coming up due to the folks at Texas A&M. Buck Schiwetz was born in Cuero in 1898. Cuero is a small town about 80 miles south of San Antonio here. He drew from an early age with almost a natural talent. He was really nurtured by his mother. His mother, formerly a student of Jose Arpa, was a very accomplished draftswoman herself, and she in turn made provisions for Buck to be able to do this. He was also reinforced by his teachers in school, and just an interesting side note, he and a young elementary classmate of his, Tom Stell, spent many hours while they were in grade school drawing and sketching all around Cuero, but particularly they had this terrific interest in the emerging automobile industry that was coming up around them in their youth, and spent a lot of times drawing and foreshadowed sort of the more sleek styles that became a part of the automobile industry. This is an example just a little bit later when Schiwetz at Texas A&M. He never lost that interest in automobiles, but this is an example from 1917, and I think you can already see that not only is an interesting rendition of an automobile at the time, it really shows at a very young age his real proficiency in terms of draftsmanship and in terms of his skill with a pencil. He moved after graduation, he expressed in the family around the table that he wanted to go to Chicago to go to art school. His father, however, had other plans, insisted that he go to Texas A&M University and he major in a new emerging field of electrical engineering. He did it. He struggled at A&M, had a hard time doing that. And so I think a compromise that was held was that he could move to the College of Architecture, where he would be learning a professional, developing a profession, but also at the same time could continue with his interest in sketching and drawing. While he was at A&M, his college education was temporarily interrupted because his ROTC unit at Texas A&M was actually assigned to military training here in San Antonio, a city that he knew well from his youth. He was here for a little over a semester. There was never the deployment of that unit that we can know of, and he went back to Texas A&M to complete his degree. He actually completed his degree in 1922, finishing not only his bachelor's, but all but a couple of courses for a master's degree in architecture. The work that he did early on was that of a pencil artist, and you can see that that was his forte. He just was great, and also he painted many scenes that were particularly San Antonio subjects, like this one on the San Antonio River that's right outside here, and then also this one in Brackenridge Park. So a lot of his earliest work were really inspired by scenes from San Antonio. In 1922, right after graduation, since he had no other jobs in Cuero, his father put him on a train, sent him to Dallas, Texas, and told him to get a job. So it was like being thrown in the deep end and learning how to swim. And he got there, went through a succession of apprenticeships, and he really knew no one in Dallas, went through a succession of apprenticeships, paid internships, and finally, and so a bit of freelancing to, be able to feed himself. And finally, in 1925, he joined the architectural firm in Dallas of Thompson & Swain. Thompson & Swain, at the time, an important residential architectural firm in Dallas, working in those beautiful homes in Highland Park and in the Park Cities, and also down in the emerging River Oaks community down in Houston. In Dallas, Schiwetz, and after he got the job with Thompson & Swain, he met Ruby Lee Sanders, who was also an artist in Dallas, and she worked there in an art supply house in Dallas. The couple was married in 1926, and the couple, after they were married, both of them spent a brief period of time at this new institute in Dallas, founded by Olin Travis, the Dallas Art Institute. They matriculated there very briefly, and then in 1927, the couple decided that they were going to be moving back to Houston. While they were in Dallas, however, Schiwetz did land his first solo exhibition, which was at the Highland Park City Hall, hosted by the Highland Park Society of the Arts. These are the kinds of paintings that he was producing, or the kind of drawings that he was producing while he was in Dallas. And again, I think you can see the ever-increasing facility, the complexity, I think, of what he's doing in terms of his compositions, and the use of a single pencil in order to create the kind of atmospheric effects and the kind of depth and contrast that are in these paintings, such as this one, or later on this one, which is the scene near the Light and Power Company. Here you can see not only is he something that became a signature for him, producing great sky work, but he also begins to use pigmentation. He also begins to place pigmentation, watercolor works in his paintings. Again, 1927, he moves to Houston to freelance. While he was in Houston, he did get on with John Staub, a couple of other important architects, and he was doing architectural delineation work there. He also, through Anderson Clayton in Houston, received his first major ad commission. It was for an ad campaign that Anderson Clayton, the big cotton factor in Houston, a campaign that they were going to do, a year-long campaign called A Tribute to Commerce in Texas. Schiwetz was commissioned to do 52 drawings. He did that, and the drawings appeared weekly in a New York journal, Commerce Journal, which was a forerunner of the Wall Street Journal. So it's the first time that in his life he received a major commission, but also his work was shown weekly, full page, in this New York journal. In 1928, with his bonus, He and Ruby Lee decided to continue their art education and decided that they would go to Art Students League to study there. They did that in an interesting way and in a circuitous route. They went first to Taos. They spent the summer in Taos, where Schiwetz sketched all around the Taos Pueblo and would bring drawings back daily to Walter Ufer. So he was under the tutelage of Walter Ufer of the Taos Society. He met a number of the artists that were part of the Taos Society and befriended several, and particularly the man with the same moniker, Buck Dunton, became a close friend. He left Taos with articles of recommendation to go to Art Students League, and they went cross country and arrived in New York in late 1928 in time for enrollment in the fall at Art Students League. Schiwetz enrolled in a night class in printmaking taught by Eugene Savage. Eugene Savage, of course, later doing some of the Hall of State, overseeing some of the Hall of State installations there in Dallas for the Centennial. There he sketched during the day, looked for commissions, and attended classes at night. He also apprenticed in a major art lithography studio, the first and major lithography studio in the country. And there also, very importantly, he got through Kenneth Reed, who was the associate editor at an architectural journal called Pencil Points. He got his first major advocate, his first major mentor. Reed gave him access. Reed did an article on him and published it for their national audience, showing his works nationally for the first time. And he also arranged with the New York Architectural League for his first solo exhibition in New York in the Architectural League offices. This is an example of the kind of drawings that he was doing in Taos, that he would take daily for wine and critique with Walter Ufer. And a great example, again, continuing as a pencil artist, but perfecting that craft ever more. These are examples of the kinds of drawings that he did daily across all of New York City. New York was involved in the time, the great building boom, and Schiwetz really took advantage of it, like this Fuller building image, or the next. A great etching entitled Manhattan Morning that was later exhibited in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. But you can see his now emerging effectiveness with printmaking, and in this case, a really fine etching. In 1929, shortly before the stock market crash, Ruby Lee and Schiwetz, their commissions were dwindling. And he got a call from an old A&M friend, Paul Franke, to join a new advertising firm in Houston, Franke, Wilkinson, and Schiwetz. Schiwetz was, in fact, to be the art director and a partner in this. They started off with two major clients, Anderson Clayton, whom Schiwetz had worked with in the past, and also Humble Oil, two corporate giants, at that point in time. And so for a new fledgling company to have them, it was terrific. This is the kind of work, again, on the side, outside of work, that Schiwetz was doing. He continued to perfect this kind of drawing and also this kind of printmaking in those years when he returned to Houston. So those are examples of the kinds of where he began to actively show prints.
Those images were all from the 20s. During the decade of the 30s, from his home in Houston, Schiwetz exhibited nationally in the American Watercolor Society Jury Exhibition in New York, in the Philadelphia Watercolor Society Exhibition, and twice in the International Watercolor Society Exhibition at the Chicago Art Institute. Also in Chicago, his work was shown in the Texas exhibit, A Century of Progress, in 1933. Closer to home, Schiwetz participated in juried competitions in New Orleans and was included in two traveling exhibitions sponsored by the Southern States Art League in 1937 and 1938. In Texas, during the 1930s, Schiwetz had 4 solo exhibitions, 2 at the Ney Museum in Austin, 1 at the Whitty here in San Antonio, and 1 at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. He entered the Houston Artists Annual Competition every year of the 1930s. There are 10 dots up there. And he also entered the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Southeast Artists Annual, also at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. His work was included in the Centennial Exposition at Fair Park in 1936, and he was in 4 traveling exhibitions sponsored by the Texas Fine Arts Association during the decade of the 30s.
So you can see that when Schiwetz returned home to Houston, and with the security of a job, a full-time job at hand, these are the years in the 30s where he really burst onto the scene in Texas. He became very, very serious about showing his work in museums across the state, about perfecting his skill and expanding his repertoire, working in other media, and laying the foundation for themes that he would revisit just many times over and over again through the remainder of his career. This is an example of the prints that he was showing after coming back from Art Students League, this one in the collection of the Whitty Museum. Again, relying on San Antonio subject matter a great deal. Another great print here of the Alamo that he was doing. This was a lithograph also that he did during that time. He began to work actively in watercolors, more and more pure watercolors. And he did very well in those, as Linda showed, exhibiting around the country in different watercolor exhibitions. These are, the next 2 pieces, are works that were the first paintings that were acquisition prizes by the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston. This small town subject, which is one of their early acquisitions, is again kind of a signature kind of work where he continued to do small townscapes, looking at the indigenous architecture, in those communities. In 1936, as Linda said, he was in the Centennial Exposition. He was in the printmakers group. This is the image that he showed. He redid this image several times, but this is an image called the Bull Wheel. And again, what you see here are themes that he returned to. First of all, he uses oil and oil fields as a subject matter for art, which is, he was not the first, but he actually probably was among the first. And he uses this, and he's intrigued by the early technology of art, and he always uses that as a framework for looking at oil fields, as you'll note in most of his paintings, wood derricks, old bull wheels, and then he juxtaposes that often with new, more modern kind of techniques in the backgrounds. He continued to draw and perfect what he began to call picture paintings. These paintings became more and more complete. He also visited the coast. He loved the Texas coast, and whenever he could get away and whenever he had the opportunity, he was painting anywhere from High Island, like this one, down to Padre Island in South Texas. And also, at the end of the 30s, he began to work in oils. This is a 1937 study of the Kreider House in Hunt. And then this is a 1938 finished piece. Think of this in the lens of classic Texas regionalism. Look at the work, look at the composition, look at how it's populated with all these points of interest. Schiwetz really began to perfect this area of painting very rapidly, we think.
During the decade of the 40s, Schiwetz exhibited nationally at the Art Institute of Chicago in 4 different juried exhibitions of the International Watercolor Society. He was at the Mint Museum of Art in Charlotte in the annual exhibition of the Southern States Art League. And in addition, in a 5-man show at the Philbrook Museum and in exhibitions at the Colorado Springs Fine Arts Center and the San Diego Museum of Art. In Texas during the 40s, Schiwetz had 4 solo exhibitions at the DMA, at Laguna Gloria in Austin, the Corpus Christi Museum, now Museum of South Texas, and also at the Whitty. In addition, at the Whitty, he had a 2-man show with Otis Dozier. He continued to exhibit in the Houston Artists Annual 7 years during the decade of the 40s, and in 1940 entered the first Texas General, and 6 successive years thereafter during the 40s in the Texas General. He was shown in the annual Texas Fine Arts Association exhibition at the NAE in Austin, and was in 2 different traveling exhibitions.
So the 1940s and the decade of the 40s is when Schiwetz transfers or transcends from being a superb pencil painter, as he called himself, to being one of the really foremost Texas painters. And you can see in the series of works that we're going to show you from the 40s how he really advances. What you'll note here that becomes a signature of his work are increasing use of color and the color combinations, these vivid, dynamic colors. His skies, the dramatic skies that he developed, and the use of the sky for effect. His brushwork, very vigorous brushwork that you begin to see more and more, but always Texas-themed subject matters. He was really a Texas artist in his heart, and that's what he always wanted to convey. This is Coastal Ghost Town, 1944. A number of these that we'll show you were exhibited in the show that Jerry Bywaters, his first DMA show in Dallas. This is Coastal Ghost Town, La Cruz Rosada, the Pink Cross, South Texas church scene that he painted in 1944. You can see he's almost cubist in some of the work that he's doing at the time. Towards Talco, another one of the ones there that was exhibited both in Dallas and also in the Texas General. The back end of town, a new find in the Now collection, an incredible painting that he did in several versions of, but this back end of town shows again his continuation of going into using townscapes and using the architecture in these towns to really convey the essence of rural Texas. Tremendous. This is a Louisiana scene, but again, great composition, great color, classic regionalist work that he's working on during this period. This, again, a new find in the collection, of Pam Hart, the granddaughter of Buck Schiwetz, who is with us today, we're happy to say. This is a brand new find. Again, we think that this would be a subject of Kilgore. This is this has everything going in it that you would think of in a Schiwetz painting. The trains, the train station, the folks in the foreground, the main street of the city, and then the millions of oil derricks that are there all around. And all of that contrasted against this energetic, dynamic sky. Again, this painting being a farm subject, agricultural subject, with all these events going on in the sky, somewhat reminiscent to us of some work like Everett Spruce. There's a painting by Everett Spruce that's hanging here. It's actually a later painting, but you'll see Spruce's use of the sky for what are major events that will go on, major explosions or moments in the sky. This is Souvenir of Yorktown, also in that Bywaters Exhibitions collection, Texas A&M. But only we want to show you that this is also something that Schiwetz often did. In this particular one, the fire station is an accurate depiction of the fire station. But what he did is take artistic liberty to move it around and juxtapose it against other buildings in town and the water tower in order to get a better composition, the composition that he wanted. A sugarcane harvest. He took, because of his work with Anderson Clayton particularly, but he had a lifelong fascination with cotton gins, mills, processing stations around the state, and he painted them as art subjects, which is, he did illustrations of those because of his work with those firms, but he painted them as fantastic works of art. And again, this one in the Dallas Museum of Art, also coming out of that same exhibition in Dallas, a great rendition of the Fulton House, one of the major iconic architectural kind of heritage in the state. And he depicts it there in all its glory, but again, surrounded by this very dramatic coastal sky. This one, over at the Ransom Center, a classic example of his work that really shows the after effects of a flood on the Guadalupe River. Incredible painting, large and beautiful painting. And then this one of Terlingua in 1948, we show you this here. This was, in fact, an award-winning and exhibited work. This one is a mixed media rendition of this. And we'll show you how this contributes to a trend that also he continued throughout his career in terms of painting similar subjects many times, but in different media and in different modes.
During the 1950s, Schiwetz entered the American Watercolor Society competition 3 different years in New York. And he had work in the Texas Contemporary Artists exhibition that traveled from the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston to Knoedler Gallery in New York. In addition, his work was included in a survey of painting in Texas, organized by Jerry Bywaters at the Dallas Museum of Art, and traveled by the American Federation of Art. In Texas, Schiwetz had 3 solo exhibitions, 2 at the DMA, 1 at Baylor, and at the Museum of Fine Arts Houston, he had a 2-person show with Robert Prusser. He did continue to compete in the Houston annual exhibitions, and he entered the Texas General in 1958. His work was shown at the Dallas Museum of Contemporary Art and in 2 different traveling exhibitions in Texas, the D.D. Feldman 100 that traveled in 1955 and 1956, and in Texas Oil, 1958.
And really in the 50s, what you see here is a continuation of Schiwetz in full stride, this prime period of his work. Here, another example of Terlingua done in the early 50s. This particular one entered and a prize winner in the Texas General. But his colors, his composition, his work on the surface of his paintings become really more and more refined and become more and more, I think, an exemplar of what is going on during this time period in terms of regionalist painting. He continued to stay and visit the coast as much as he could. This particular painting is one that was exhibited here in the McNay at his exhibition here. This is a Freeport, Texas scene close to where we grew up. As a matter of fact, my father bought bait for us from that very bait stand. So we're very pleased to have that. But this one in the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, showing again the small town of Edant, Texas, and doing it in a really vivid way, and showcasing the hay wagon that's there in the front. And he painted town scenes all over. Beginning in 1945, he worked with Humble Oil on a brand new publication called The Humble Way. It was their magazine that they distributed to employees and key clients all around the country. And it gave Schiwetz an incredible opportunity to do what he always loved to do anyway. And that was to get out of the office and go all over the state of Texas in search of subject matter. And this is an example of what he was doing with that. He also began to populate his canvases with birds in flight. lots of birds in flight. He used those to further accentuate the skies and to create interesting additional compositional elements in his work. But really, there was also some suggestions that he used that as a psychological ploy to somehow express in his paintings this desire to fly, to move, to be out. And so I think you begin to see a lot more of that. This one is another example of geese flying in the Eagle Lake area, a scene that Lynn and I have seen so many times in our lives in that part of the world. He also used, again, oil subject matter as a subject matter for fine art more than most people. This one, Christmas Eve in Kilgore, now in the collection of the Kilgore Oil Museum, again, is a sort of tour de force in terms of everything that one would think about in terms of the coexistence between between oil as an industry and a town, which is supporting the East Texas oil field. He visited Spindletop and used Spindletop as an example of his art, as a study for his artwork throughout his career. What he found in Spindletop, because it was one of the earliest oil fields, is he found a lot of older technology there, like again this bull wheel, which he uses in the foreground so many times, as Hogue used plows and other instruments in his to show effects on the land by technology of farming. You'll see this in his work. You see the wooden derricks, and then further back you'll see the newer development coming in. This particular painting is probably the largest one. This is the Goose Creek oil field. Again, similar in composition, but the largest scale painting they did is about 8-foot painting. Again, this is in Pam's collection, and this is a really incredible work to see in person. It's really good. But he never left being, at his base, a pencil painter, and he continued to go back and do these exquisite drawings, detailed, fine drawings. To us, Schiwetz drawings, or a really great Schiwetz drawing is like what you see as a Frank Ray pastel gem. I mean, he had the capacity with a pencil to do things that were amazing, as Ray had with pieces of chalk to create just unbelievable imagery with almost at ease. This, another example of that in 1959, where he was using pencil paintings as a way of describing indigenous Texas architecture and important preservation efforts.
Schiwetz stayed closer to home during the 60s and the 70s. He had 2 solo exhibitions in Texas, one in the 1960s at the McNay, and one in the 1970s at the University of Texas here in San Antonio. That was an in-depth retrospective curated by Henderson Shuffler. He entered work in the 1962 Texas General, the Texas Watercolor Society competition here at the Whitty, and in the exhibition Fire at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. His work was exhibited in A Century of Art and Life in Texas at the DMA. He was in a group show of Texas artists at the Texas House of Representatives, and in the traveling exhibition entitled Texas Painting and Sculpture, the 20th Century. Jerry Bywaters had at that time moved from DMA to Pollock Galleries at SMU. SMU and the Whitty curated this show of Texas painting and sculpture that traveled the state.
The 1960s and on through the 70s is when really Schiwetz really sort of perfects what, again, Sarah Beth Wilson is calling an expressionist regionalist style. He was a regional expressionist. And you can see in this 1961 painting of Fort McKavett how He really is becoming, again, increasingly refined in color, sophisticated in his composition, and also, again, always the use of sky that really creates this extra drama in any one of the great Schiwetz paintings. Continued to be at the coast, and it's also during that time that he begins to use his favorite bird, the pelican. He was enamored by pelicans. He was always interested in, used to, when he was in his art agency or ad agency, would go over to the Houston Zoo at lunchtime, sit down with a sandwich, and look at pelicans that were there. He just really was amazed by those birds. Pelicans, I think, to Schiwetz was like jackrabbits were to Otis Dozier in his early works. Here's another one, actually the cover piece for the book, an Aransas pelican roost that is really beautiful, and again, these incredible hues that he's got in these paintings. More coastal subject matter, populated with everything in the world that you would see on the Texas coast. Great architectural elements, shorebirds all around, cattle in the fields, and these beautiful turquoise bays that he shows. And this one of the Coast Guard Station at Matagorda, again, a great example and a really fine work by Schiwetz as well. This, you can see, as I said, he always had this interest in rice dryers, cotton mills, anything. And actually, these were the skyscrapers in rural communities. This is the only thing that you would see beside a water tower that would, when you came into a town that was really of scale, unlike maybe Dallas or Houston at the time. This is the rice dryer at Lissy, which he painted many times. And this one is a really much more cubist, in fact, rendition of this. And here you begin to see what became known as the chocolate skies that he began to use. The colors of his skies become darker in order to contrast the material or the subject matter. As in, again, this great work at Texas A&M of a Belmont gin from the 1920s that's contrasted against this incredible night sky. He even used oil field subjects, and they became more abstract, and they became really much more colorful types of renditions, and again, more abstracted over time. Schiwetz had actually started, we mentioned Prusser earlier. He and Prusser were instrumental in helping to start the Contemporary Arts Association in Houston. Prusser was interested in abstract painting as early as 1948, and he was in dialogue, because both taught at the museum school. He was in dialogue with Prusser. He experimented with, when he could paint outside of the business requirements, with abstract materials early, but he particularly moved into this field in the 60s. This is an example. Continuing on, these are a number of examples of what he was doing. He never quite reaches, this is one at Texas A&M, oil derricks, using the same subject matter, but trying to present those in a much more increasingly abstract form. He never really goes into complete non-objectivity, but he certainly moved the frontier, constantly moving toward that, such as this abstract, a red sky abstract. And this, a still life on his Texas beaches of things, of found objects on the beach, which is an incredible work, we think. He painted forever and maintained his proficiency. The 70s for Buck became a tough time. He, all through his career, beginning after the war, and I think the stress of having to run his business by himself during the war, but he battled pretty severe bouts with alcoholism throughout his lifetime. But during the 70s, he also was in a serious car wreck. He battled cancer. His wife was institutionalized, regrettably. So he really had a really tough go of it. He continued to paint. He moved down to back home to his Cuero area, thanks to some friends in that part of the world. But he continued to maintain, and he painted there, and he sold works at Meredith Lawn Gallery, which was more or less a lifelong kind of affiliation that he had. But he continued to paint. He died in 1984 in February. This painting was one among the last that he did. This is in the collection of the Texas A&M University Press. This was done in August of 1983. And as you can see here, he maintained his proficiency until the end in terms of creating fabulous, complete paintings that were really worthy works of art.
By the numbers, during his career, Schiwetz had over 80 museum exhibitions, over 30 juried awards, 10 solo exhibitions. Today you can find his work in 7 permanent museum collections.
To summarize for us what we found in working with and looking at these works of Buck Schiwetz, he was obviously extremely prolific in his artistic output and did that over a long, long period of time. He was respected and influential influential in the field, and he was well known and in dialogue again with other important figures. Close friends, becoming a close friend with Jerry Bywaters, a confidant and a close friend with Otis Dozier. Continued to have a strong network that he was, and also was a leader himself in helping to support new generations of young artists through the Contemporary Arts Association and also through the other art organizations that he helped to found in Houston. He progressed effectively over his time with great facility, from drawing to printmaking to watercolor to oils, and then combining them all in these fabulous mixed media renditions that he did. He was self-taught, but what he did do throughout his career, as a hallmark of every great self-taught artist, because art instruction was not always available to him as a working guy, he taught, he learned constantly, he experimented constantly, and he perfected himself and held himself to extremely high standards.
Opportunities to see a selection of artwork by Buck Schiwetz began in September at Texas A&M University, and from there the exhibition, a selection of paintings that you would see at the Stark, a group will travel to Tyler in January 2024, to the Grace Museum in Abilene during the summer of 2024, and will end at the capital of Texas in January 2025.
Not only was it for us really exciting to do this research and to try to look at so much work by Schiwetz over the course of his career, but one of the great benefits, I think, of our work here doing this through Texas A&M has been our opportunity to work with other researchers at Texas A&M. One of the things we want to do is introduce you quickly to to Tiana Uchaz, who is a new associate professor of art history at the university. And what we want to show you is what we will be prototyping to go along with the museum exhibitions, a new researchable database for visual imagery that can be used not only for Schiwetz, although we're prototyping it here, but imagine this with other Texas artists that we'll be able to document and include over the years. So Tiana, would you kind of quickly take us through it? Glad you're here.
Thanks so much. I am thrilled to be able to tell you today about our plans for the digital companion to the exhibition. It will, as Bill and Linda mentioned, launch in September to coincide with the opening of the exhibition at the Stark Galleries. And we are thinking about it as the first iteration in a building database. So what I'm going to present to you are the wireframes, that is static images from the designer, for the website. And at the end of the day, when I say digital companion, I do mean a website. And so what you see on the left is an image of the landing page, the home page, and you would see this, and it continues well off screen, this long interface, no matter if you arrive with your desktop or laptop or a tablet or a phone. And I'm going to take you through a few of the features, but I do want to point out that we're thinking of this as a much larger project over time, and Buck Schiwetz would be a featured artist among many, or featured artist rather, alongside featured themes perhaps. And so it's a resource for researchers and for the broader public, but we're also thinking of it as a resource for teaching. So in the classroom, we'll be able to share images of early Texas art with our students, and especially at A&M as we're revamping our Texas art history course, which hasn't been taught since the pandemic. But we're also thinking of bringing in research components for our students to teach them how do you do research on Texas artists and to have them actually help populate this database and these websites over time. So let me take you through a few of the ideas. So here we are at the top of the home page. And again, just to show you, we're planning for a much more expanded thing over time, but this is the prototype, and Buck is our first featured artist. If we scroll down, we have a little bit of an intro about Buck. You'll see right now that it looks like garbled Latin, and that's because it's placeholder text. I assure you, it will actually say something substantive. I want to point out that you're now on an interface where you can browse all of Schiwetz's artworks. They just tile as far as they will go, and you can scroll down to be able to select amongst them. Let's say you're interested in that Houston skyline there in pencil. You'll be able to click on it, and it'll open up a small information area. And then if you'd like to know more, you can follow the See More, and it'll take you to a page about that particular artwork with greater details and the ability to zoom in as closely as possible on the image, depending on the resolution that we're able to acquire. Moving back, you can close it up and you can continue to browse down, but I also want to show you a few other features instead. One of which is the ability to filter using this side menu. You can open it up or you can hide it. And then it allows you to say, well, you know, I only really want to see the artworks from the 1940s. So you'll be able to filter by time or by any of the other metadata categories that we're tracking in the database that sits underneath this website. So for instance, maybe you want to see all the images in the collection of the Whitty Museum or those that won particular prizes. You'll be able to filter those tiles that way, and those tiles will repopulate for you. And then, of course, you can move it to the side. I want to show you the other feature we're really excited about, and Bill kind of foreshadowed this earlier, and that is the idea of a map and timeline as an interface to access the works of an artist, particularly like Buck, who is exhibiting works across the state and the country. So for instance, you'll see along the bottom there is a timeline with a slider bar. At the moment it's set in the 1970s, and that would allow all of the relevant places to pop up on the map for the 1970s. Let's say we select College Station, we click on that little button, or that little dot rather, you'll have what you see there on the right of that red circle. The images that are related to College Station will pop right up. You'll again be able to click on the See More to find out more about those images. And in addition to navigating by the timeline and the map, you can also make use of the same search and filter functions that were available on the earlier page. Now this is the Texas tab. You'll notice that we can also toggle to the full country map, and we'll be able to do the exact same things, that is browse by timeline, and have those places populate on the map, or to open that filter menu again, depending on what kind of view and interface you'd like to use. The last thing that I'd like to show you about our plans for the Buck Schiwetz prototype is the exhibition catalog essay that Bill and Linda will publish in tandem on this website. And it allows for greater context for people who are exploring Buck's images. How do they fit into his larger timeline and story? And so this essay will help to give that context. We would like to thank the Center of Digital Humanities Research at Texas A&M University, which is now housed in the Melbourne G. Glasscock Center for Humanities Research. And they've been the ones who have been helping us with the wireframes. The wireframes are now in the hands of the developer, who is actually making the functional website, and we're really excited to have that open up. In terms of the featured artists in the future, we've now begun an excellence fund for Texas art history at Texas A&M University, and I'm supervising an undergraduate student who's doing research into Texas artist Ima Pendergrass, so we might see her pop up in the near future. We hope that other student projects from the courses we teach will populate there, but we're also open to ingesting into the database, into the website, other things that respond to the desires and needs of the community. And I'd like to welcome Bill and Linda back up to take questions because their presentation was just stunning, and I'm sure that you have many things you'd like to ask.
We appreciate it. You did a great job.
Stay here with us.
That's right. Actually, ladies and gentlemen, I think in the interest of time, I think that we're first on the program today, and we want to be mindful there are a lot of other great programs that will follow. So I think we'll probably have to forego questions. Linda, Tiana, we'll all be around during the rest of the conference if you have any questions about Buck Schiwetz. Again, we commend the book to you. We're very proud of the book. I think it's an excellent addition, frankly, to the story of Buck Schiwetz and to bring him back and put him in proper perspective. So we'll hope that you'll look forward to it. And we also want to say to Tiana that, again, this is a sterling example of the power of what can happen, I think, when we are able to collaborate with a first-rate university. And Tiana is really, although she is a Renaissance scholar from Columbia most recently, we have adopted her, and actually maybe we're kidnapping her in some ways, to become really a Texas art scholar as well, and she is fulfilling that beyond expectations. So we're very grateful for your. This is a great new tool as well. So thank you all very, very much for allowing us to be here and being an attentive audience. Thanks so much.